The 54th Parliament has now been formally opened. The MPs have been sworn in and a new Speaker of the House elected. That, of course, is Jerry Brownlee. It follows a tumultuous week so far for the new coalition, with leaks, protests and allegations of financial mismanagement by the old government. For more on this, we are joined by the Leader of the Opposition, Chris Hipkins. Now, I know, Chris, you did swear allegiance to the King, but some Te Pate Māori members were a wee bit cute yesterday. And there are allegations that they also insulted King Charles. I mean, was this appropriate?
Look, I'm not in a position to really judge that. That's really a question for the Clerk of the House, who can get translations of exactly what it is they said. They are entitled to take the oath in Te Reo Māori, and many members do. Many Pākehā members actually are choosing to take the oath in Te Reo Māori yesterday, which I thought was a very nice thing. It's official language of New Zealand, something to be celebrated. Whether they followed the words exactly as they were supposed to, that's really something that the Clerk will have to determine.
Now, this swearing-in followed, obviously, the national protests yesterday calling for Māori unity. The Prime Minister came out and said, look, for God's sake, we've only been in government for 1 week, cut us some slack, it's unfair. Do you think that's fair?
Well, no, I think it's very fair that they be subject to scrutiny and criticism. That's one of the wonderful things about democracy. You know, protest is a very legitimate form of democracy. When the farmers were protesting against the previous government, you know, driving their tractors down the road and blocking the road, that was absolutely legitimate. They were totally entitled to do that, and Māori were entitled to protest yesterday. And I think we're already seeing signs from this government that they have quite an anti-Māori bias in some of the policies that they have signed up to already. So I think the fact that Māori want to have a view on that and want to have their voices heard, that is something that we should celebrate about our democracy. People are entitled to have their voices heard.
And the Māori King has obviously called for a national hui to unify the nation next year. Will you be supporting this?
I haven't seen the invitation or what that might look like yet, but I'm certainly very open to conversations with them about what that might look like. I certainly think we should be striving towards unity. I think if you look over my lifetime, the last 4 or 5 decades, New Zealand's made enormous progress on issues around Māori, and that's been under successive governments, Labour and National, including other parties. And I think we're seeing now, probably for the first time in decades, a government that actually wants to wind back some of that progress. And so I think the fact that Māori are concerned about that is legitimate, and they're absolutely entitled to be.
I want to talk finance with you now, because the new Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, she's come out firing. She's claiming there are big holes in the Treasury books as a result of your government's financial mismanagement. This is not a good look for you guys.
Well, it's just absolute fiction. I mean, the pre-election fiscal update, which is released before every election, sets out in great detail what the budget's for, which projects are time limited, which projects have the potential of cost overruns. And bearing in mind this is not new, in 2017 when we became the government, we found that a number of their projects had been time limited as well. A number of their fiscal risks, so a number of the costs of things that they'd committed to, have gone up. That is the nature of the economic cycle we're in at the moment. In an inflationary economic cycle, the government's costs go up. Just as households have seen their household costs have been going up, the government's costs have gone up as well. Nicola Willis's big challenge is that the promises that the National Party made before the election were unaffordable. We said at the time they were unaffordable. They've now come to the realisation they're unaffordable, and they're trying to blame anyone but themselves.
I want to read this to you, because this is what she was saying. She said your team was showing off before the election about leaving fiscal booby traps for the new incoming government, and you knew your spending was out of control. Did you?
No, absolute nonsense. In the pre-election fiscal update, everything that the previous government was working on, everything that was time-limited funding, she seems to have a problem with time-limited funding in areas where the National Party in their own fiscal plan had provisioned for. So, for example, the Food in Schools program, we set that up during COVID. We've been funding it on a year-to-year basis. It's been very successful. We indicated in our manifesto that we were going to continue funding for that. So did the National Party. And so for her to now say, oh, this is a terrible travesty, they should have been funding, had funding set aside for it over the longer term. They knew before the election that we didn't. They'd made a provision for it in their plan. We made a provision for it in ours. Nicola Willis is trying to rewrite history, and she's doing it for one simple reason. She can't make her numbers add up.
She is complaining, though, that some of your projects that you had, they didn't only double in cost that you initiated, that some of them are triple in cost. Do you agree with that?
Well, if you look at cost escalations across big government projects, I'll give you an example of one that happened under our government that we inherited from the last national government. Transmission Gully was contracted through a PPP. We ended up having to put significant extra funding into that because of cost overruns to make sure that motorway actually got completed. I could go and find significant school building projects that we inherited from the last national government where we had to put money in order to make sure those projects got completed because the costs went up. That's the nature of government. We allowed in our financial planning for cost escalation in existing projects. And we actually warned the National Party very publicly during the campaign that they had not made sufficient provision for cost overruns, that the promises that they were making were unaffordable, and they said, no, we're much better managers of the economy, we'll sort it all out. Clearly they're not, because they can't make their numbers add up and they're now trying to blame everybody else.
Just quickly before we go, your government, your Labor is calling on the government to give visas to Kiwi families stuck in Gaza. Are you getting any buy-in from the Foreign Minister on this?
I haven't had any direct feedback on that, but it is the right thing to do. We did that previously. If you look at the evacuations from Afghanistan, for example, we as a government, as a Labor-led government, worked really hard to be able to accommodate New Zealanders and the relatives of New Zealanders evacuating from Afghanistan. And that was a really difficult time, bearing in mind that we had MIQ in place at the time. So if we could do it then, I think they can do it now.
Lucky last one before we go, talking Christmas parties today. Have you ever got up to any mischief at your Christmas party, Chris Hipkins?
Well, actually, there's a Christmas party coming up next week, which I'm quite looking forward to, although I'm having my wisdom teeth removed the next day, so I'll have to be a little bit well-behaved.
Maybe you could take some of that wisdom teeth drug beforehand, and God knows what could happen. Leader of the Opposition, Chris Hipkins, thank you so much.